Before swords clashed, before shields rang, before mortals even thought of war, there was silence. Not the peaceful silence of a calm night, but the heavy silence of a battlefield before the first arrow flies. This is the silence of myth, the stage upon which gods and mortals alike would act out the eternal drama of conflict. And standing at the center of that stage, waiting with restless energy, is Ares, the god of war. He is not the strategist, not the planner, not the wise general who calculates victory. No, Ares is the roar, the fury, the chaos itself. He is the spirit of battle that surges when armies collide, the pounding of blood in the ears, the wild charge that ignores reason. Ares is not loved. He is feared, mocked, sometimes even humiliated. The Greeks admired Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy, but Ares, he was the god you prayed would stay far away from your city. He was the embodiment of war's madness, not its glory. And yet, without Ares, the battlefield would be empty. Without his fury, there would be no clash, no chaos, no raw passion. He is the god who makes war terrifying, but also unforgettable. He is the silent heartbeat of myth, waiting to erupt into thunder. This story, the entire saga of Ares, is not just about battles. It is about fear and fury, love and scandal, humiliation and triumph. It is about a god who represents the side of war that mortals wish to forget but cannot escape. So, settle in. We are about to walk slowly, step by step, across the silent battlefield of myth, where Ares waits with his spear, his rage, and his eternal flame of conflict. Like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments from where you're watching, unless you're tuning in from inside a bronze helmet, in which case, please stop commenting and start echoing softly. Ares was born into the royal household of Olympus, the son of Zeus, king of the gods, and Hera, queen of the heavens. His birth was not greeted with the same admiration as that of his siblings. While Athena was celebrated for her wisdom, Apollo for his music, and Artemis for her skill in the hunt, Ares was destined to embody something far more unsettling, the raw spirit of war. From the moment of his arrival, Ares carried with him the essence of conflict. He was not the god of careful planning or noble defense, but of the clash itself, the fury, the bloodshed, the chaos that erupts when armies meet. His nature was fiery, restless, and difficult to contain. Zeus, though proud of his son, often found him troublesome. Hera, too, struggled with Ares's temperament. Unlike their other children, who brought balance and beauty to Olympus, Ares seemed to thrive on disorder. His cries as a child were said to echo like the sounds of battle, unsettling even the gods. Yet Ares was necessary. In the grand design of the cosmos, war could not be ignored. Just as peace had its goddess, so too did strife need its god. Ares was born to fill that role, to embody the side of conflict that mortals feared but could never escape. His birth marked the beginning of a divine presence that would forever shape the myths of Greece. Ares was not loved, but he was inevitable. He was the god who reminded mortals that war was not only strategy and honor, but also rage and destruction. To understand Ares, one must look beyond the clashing of swords and the shouting of warriors. Ares is not simply the god who stands on the battlefield. He is the very essence of war itself. He represents the raw, unfiltered energy that surges when conflict begins, the pounding heartbeat, the rush of adrenaline, the chaos that sweeps away reason. Unlike Athena, who embodies strategy, wisdom, and the careful planning of victory. Ares is the opposite. He is the spirit of war in its most primal form. He does not calculate, he charges. He does not weigh options, he strikes. He is the god of fury, of passion, of the uncontrollable storm that overtakes mortals when they fight. The Greeks saw in Ares the darker side of conflict. He was not the noble defender of cities, nor the wise general who secured peace through clever tactics. He was the god of bloodshed, destruction, and rage. His presence on the battlefield meant not order, but chaos. Soldiers feared him because he represented the part of war that could not be controlled, the madness that turns men into beasts. Yet, Ares was not entirely despised. His existence reminded mortals that war was not only about honor and victory, but also about survival and raw strength. He was the god who embodied the truth that conflict is never clean, never simple, and never without suffering. In this way, Ares was both terrifying and necessary. His spirit was not confined to battlefields alone. Ares represented the passions of the human heart, anger, jealousy, and the drive to fight for what one desires. He was the god of conflict in all its forms, whether between armies, families, or even lovers. His essence was the reminder that struggle is part of existence, and that fury, though destructive, is also deeply human. Thus, Ares was more than a warrior god. He was the living embodiment of war's spirit, the chaos, the passion, the fury that mortals could never fully escape. He was the storm that raged within the human soul, the eternal flame of conflict that burned across myth and history. In the grand theater of Greek mythology, few rivalries are as striking as that between Ares and Athena. Both are gods of war, yet they represent entirely different sides of conflict. To understand Ares fully, one must place him beside Athena, for together they show the two faces of battle. Ares is the god of raw violence. He thrives in the chaos of combat, the clash of swords, the cries of warriors. His presence is the storm that sweeps across the battlefield, unpredictable and destructive. He represents the passion of war, the fury that drives men to fight without thought of consequence. Athena, by contrast, is the goddess of wisdom and strategy. She embodies the careful planning of campaigns, the discipline of soldiers, and the intelligence that turns chaos into victory. Where Ares charges blindly, Athena calculates. Where Ares revels in destruction, Athena seeks order and resolution. The Greeks admired Athena far more than Ares. To them, war was not glorious when it was reckless. It was honorable when it was guided by wisdom. Athena was celebrated in temples, honored in festivals, and revered as the protector of cities. Ares, meanwhile, was feared, avoided, and often humiliated in myth. Their rivalry is not simply personal, but symbolic. It reflects the eternal tension between passion and reason, chaos and order, fury and wisdom. On the battlefield, both forces exist. Soldiers feel the surge of Ares in their blood, but they rely on Athena to guide their actions. Without Ares, war would lack fire. Without Athena, it would lack purpose. In Homer's Iliad, this contrast is vividly shown. Ares fights for the Trojans, charging recklessly into battle, while Athena aids the Greeks, guiding heroes with strategy and cunning. When Ares is wounded by Diomedes, it is Athena who helps the mortal strike the blow. The god of war falls, defeated by the goddess of wisdom. Thus, Ares and Athena are not merely siblings in Olympus. They are opposites, locked in eternal balance. Together, they remind us that war is both fury and calculation, both chaos and order. One without the other is incomplete. To understand Ares is to step into the storm of his nature. Unlike many of the Olympians, whose personalities were complex blends of wisdom, artistry, or cunning, Ares was defined by three overwhelming traits: fear, fury, and passion. Ares was not subtle. He did not whisper strategies or weave clever tricks. His presence was loud, fiery, and impossible to ignore. On the battlefield, he was the embodiment of fury, the sudden rush of blood, the reckless charge, the roar that drowns out reason. Mortals who felt the madness of combat believed they were touched by Ares himself. But Ares was also the god of fear. His companions, Phobos, fear, and Deimos, terror, were born from his essence. Wherever Ares went, dread followed. Soldiers trembled not only at the clash of weapons, but at the invisible weight of panic that seemed to spread when Ares entered the fray. He was not just the god of fighting, he was the god of the emotions that make fighting terrifying. And yet, Ares was not only rage and fear, he was also a god of passion. His love affair with Aphrodite revealed another side of him, a fiery devotion, a hunger for beauty, and a willingness to risk scandal for desire. In this way, Ares embodied the passions of the human heart, not calm or measured, but wild, consuming, and often reckless. The Greeks often criticized Ares for his lack of restraint. Unlike Athena, who guided war with wisdom, Ares was impulsive, unpredictable, and prone to humiliation. He could be wounded by mortals, mocked by gods, and trapped in embarrassing situations. Yet these flaws made him strangely human. He was a god, but one who reflected the raw emotions mortals knew all too well. Thus, the personality of Ares was a storm, fear that unsettled, fury that destroyed, and passion that consumed. He was not admired, but he was unforgettable. His essence was the reminder that war is not only about victory or defeat, but about the emotions that drive mortals into battle, emotions that are as dangerous as they are powerful. Every god in Olympus had their symbols, their tools, and their marks of power. For Ares, the god of war, these were not gentle instruments of music or wisdom, but the harsh and heavy tools of battle. His weapons and armor reflected his nature, loud, destructive, and impossible to ignore. Ares was most often depicted carrying a spear. The spear was not only a weapon, but a symbol of his direct, straightforward approach to conflict. Unlike Athena, who might use strategy or clever tactics, Ares preferred the spear's simplicity, a weapon meant for charging, piercing, and striking without hesitation. His shield was another symbol, representing the chaos of battle. It was said to gleam with terror, frightening those who faced him. The shield was not only protection, but a reminder that war is both attack and defense, fury and endurance. Ares also wore bronze armor, shining and heavy, the kind that clanged loudly with every step. His helmet, often depicted with a crest, gave him a fearsome appearance. To mortals, the sight of Ares in full armor was not inspiring but terrifying, the embodiment of war itself walking among them. Beyond weapons and armor, Ares had sacred symbols that reflected his essence. The dog and the vulture were animals associated with him. Even plants were tied to Ares. the serpent and certain thorny plants were linked to his worship, symbols of danger and destruction. Unlike the olive tree of Athena, which represented peace and prosperity, Ares's symbols were harsh, unfriendly, and unsettling. Together, these weapons, armor, and symbols painted a clear picture of Ares. Ares was rarely alone on the battlefield. Wherever he strode, two shadowy figures followed close behind, Deimos and Phobos, his sons and companions. They were not gods of wisdom or beauty, nor did they bring comfort or peace. Instead, they embodied the emotions that make war terrifying: fear and terror. Deimos, whose name means dread or panic, was the embodiment of the sudden chill that grips a soldier's heart when the enemy charges. He was the whisper of doubt, the trembling of hands, the moment when courage falters. Mortals believed that when they felt dread before battle, Deimos was near, walking silently beside them. Phobos, whose name means terror, was even more overwhelming. He was the scream in the night, the chaos that spreads when armies break and flee. Phobos was the uncontrollable fear that turns order into madness, the force that makes even the bravest warrior drop his shield and run. Together, Deimos and Phobos were inseparable from Ares. They were not simply his children, they were his essence, the emotions that gave his fury its power. When Ares charged into battle, Deimos and Phobos rode with him, spreading panic and terror among mortals. Their presence made the god of war not only a figure of violence, but also of psychological dread. The Greeks understood this well. They knew that war was not only about swords and spears, but about the emotions that could decide victory or defeat. Ares brought fury, but his companions brought fear, and often fear was more dangerous than any weapon. In art and literature, Deimos and Phobos were depicted as shadowy figures, sometimes riding with Ares in his chariot. Their names became symbols of fear itself, echoing through history. Even today, the word phobia comes from Phobos, a reminder of the terror that once followed the god of war. Thus, Ares was never truly alone. His companions, Deimos and Phobos, ensured that wherever he went, fear and terror followed. Together, they made war not only a clash of weapons, but a storm of emotions that mortals could never escape. Among the many tales of Olympus, few are as famous or scandalous as the love affair between Ares, the god of war, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Their union was the meeting of two extremes: fury and passion, violence and desire, chaos and harmony. Aphrodite was married to Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship. He was clever, patient, and hard-working, but he lacked the fiery charm that Ares possessed. Where Hephaestus spent his days forging weapons and tools, Ares spent his nights burning with passion and charging into battle. Aphrodite, drawn to excitement and intensity, found herself irresistibly attracted to the god of war. Their love was secret, but not subtle. The two would meet in hidden chambers, away from the eyes of Olympus, and their union produced children who embodied both love and strife. Among them were Eros, Cupid, the mischievous god of desire, and Harmonia, the goddess of harmony, a surprising child of two parents who represented conflict and passion. But secrets rarely last long among the gods. Their affair became known, and it led to one of the most famous scandals in mythology. Hephaestus, clever and cunning, devised a trap to expose them. He forged an invisible net of unbreakable chains and placed it over his bed. When Ares and Aphrodite lay together, the net fell upon them, binding them tightly. Hephaestus then called upon the other gods to witness the scene. Imagine the halls of Olympus filled with laughter as Apollo, Hermes, and even Poseidon looked upon the trapped lovers. Ares, the mighty god of war, humiliated before his peers, unable to break free. Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, caught in scandal. This tale revealed much about Ares's nature. He was powerful, passionate, and fearless, but also reckless. His love for Aphrodite was fiery, but it led him into humiliation. Yet, even after the scandal, their bond endured. The god of war and the goddess of love remained drawn to one another. Their union, a reminder that passion often ignores reason. For the Greeks, this story was more than gossip. It symbolized the eternal tension between love and war, beauty and violence, desire and destruction. Ares and Aphrodite were opposites, yet together they embodied the full spectrum of human passion. The love affair between Ares and Aphrodite was passionate, fiery, and reckless. But passion often invites consequence, and in this case, consequence came in the form of Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, Aphrodite's husband. Hephaestus was not a warrior like Ares, nor was he dazzlingly beautiful like Aphrodite. He was a craftsman, patient and clever, with hands that shaped metal into wonders. Though he lacked the fiery charm of his rival, he possessed something far more dangerous: cunning. When whispers of Aphrodite's affair reached him, Hephaestus did not rage or storm. Instead, he forged a plan. In his workshop, he crafted a net of unbreakable chains, so fine and invisible that no eye could see it, yet so strong that no god could escape it. This was not a weapon for battle, but a trap for humiliation. He placed the net upon his bed, waiting for the inevitable. And soon enough, Ares and Aphrodite came together, unaware of the snare that lay beneath them. As they embraced, the net fell, binding them tightly in its unyielding grip. Hephaestus then summoned the gods of Olympus to witness the scene. Imagine the great hall filled with laughter as Apollo, Hermes, and even Poseidon looked upon the trapped lovers. Ares, the mighty god of war, caught helplessly in chains. Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, exposed in scandal. The gods mocked, joked, and laughed, their amusement echoing through Olympus. For Ares, it was a moment of humiliation. The god who embodied fury and strength was powerless, reduced to a spectacle. Where Aphrodite, it was shame, her beauty overshadowed by betrayal. And for Hephaestus, it was triumph, not through battle, but through cleverness. This scandal became one of the most famous tales in Greek mythology. It revealed the vulnerability of even the greatest gods, showing that passion can lead to downfall, and that cunning can defeat strength. Ares, despite his power, was undone not by a warrior, but by a craftsman's trap. Yet, even after the laughter faded, the affair continued. Ares and Aphrodite remained drawn to one another, their bond too fiery to be broken by chains or shame. The trap of Hephaestus was a lesson, but not an ending. It was a reminder that love and war, when entwined, are forces too strong to be silenced. The Trojan War was one of the greatest conflicts in Greek mythology, a clash of heroes, gods, and destiny. And of course, where there was war, there was Ares. The god of battle could not resist the call of combat, and he threw himself into the struggle with all the fury that defined his nature. Ares sided with the Trojans, fighting against the Greeks. His presence on the battlefield was terrifying, clad in bronze armor, spear in hand, accompanied by his sons Deimosphere and Phobos' terror. Wherever he strode, panic spread, and the clash of war grew louder. Mortals believed that when courage faltered, it was Ares himself who had entered the fray. Yet, despite his divine power, Ares was not invincible. In Homer's Iliad, his rage led him into reckless battles, and his lack of strategy left him vulnerable. One of the most famous moments came when the mortal hero, Diomedes, aided by Athena, struck Ares down. Guided by the goddess of wisdom, Diomedes hurled his spear, piercing Ares' body. The god of war cried out in pain, his voice echoing like thunder across the battlefield. Wounded and humiliated, Ares fled to Olympus, complaining to Zeus about his injury. Imagine the mighty god of war storming home, shouting about his wound, only to be met with Zeus's cold disapproval. Even his father found him troublesome, calling him hateful and reckless. For Ares, it was not only a defeat in battle, but a blow to his pride. This episode revealed the essence of Ares' role in myth. He was powerful, yes, but his fury often led to failure. Unlike Athena, who guided mortals with wisdom and strategy, Ares embodied the chaos of war, destructive, loud, and often self-defeating. His defeats in the Trojan War showed that raw violence alone could not secure victory. Still, Ares' rage was unrelenting. Even wounded, even mocked, he returned to battle again and again. His passion for war was not diminished by humiliation. He was the god who thrived in conflict, who lived for the clash, even if it meant suffering defeat. Thus, in the Trojan War, Ares revealed both his strength and his weakness. He was the storm that terrified mortals, but also the reckless fury that could be overcome. His defeats were as legendary as his rage, reminding mortals that war is not only about power, but also about wisdom, and that fury without thought often leads to downfall. Though Ares was often feared and mocked for his reckless nature, he was also a father. His children reflected the many sides of his personality. Some carried his fury, others his passion, and a few even embodied harmony and balance, surprising traits for the god of war. One of his most famous children was Harmonia, the goddess of harmony and concord. Born from his union with Aphrodite, Harmonia was a paradox, the daughter of war and love, yet she represented peace. Her presence reminded mortals that even in the chaos of battle, harmony could eventually emerge. Harmonia's story was not without tragedy, but her role symbolized the possibility of balance between conflict and affection. Another child was Eros, Cupid, the mischievous god of desire. With his bow and arrows, Eros could stir passion in mortals and gods alike. His playful nature contrasted sharply with Ares' fury, yet he carried the same intensity, a reminder that love, like war, can strike suddenly and overwhelm reason. Ares also fathered Phobos, fear, and Deimos, terror, who often accompanied him into battle. These sons embodied the emotions that made war terrifying, spreading panic among soldiers. Together, they ensured that Ares' presence was not only physical but psychological, turning courage into dread. Other children included Adrestia, a goddess associated with balance between good and evil, and various warrior figures tied to strife and conflict. Each child reflected a fragment of Ares' essence, whether it was fear, passion, harmony, or destruction. The diversity of Ares' offspring revealed the complexity of his role. He was not simply the god of violence. He was the source of emotions and forces that shaped human life. His children embodied the full spectrum of conflict and passion, from terror to love, from harmony to chaos. For mortals, these stories were reminders that war and love are deeply connected. From Ares and Aphrodite came both fear and desire, both harmony and strife. His children carried forward the eternal truth that human existence is shaped by conflict, passion, and the fragile balance between them. Among the many legends tied to Ares, few are as fascinating as the tales of the Amazons, the warrior women said to be his daughters. They were not ordinary mortals, nor were they gentle figures of peace. The Amazons embodied the spirit of their father, fierce, fearless, and unyielding in battle. The Amazons were described as living in lands far from Greece, often on the edges of the known world. They formed societies where women ruled, fought, and defended their people. Unlike the patriarchal cities of Greece, the Amazons lived by their own laws, guided by strength and independence. To the Greeks, they were both admired and feared, a living reminder of Ares' influence beyond Olympus. Each Amazon was said to carry the fire of Ares within her. They trained as warriors, wielded weapons, and rode into battle with unmatched courage. Their skill was legendary. Archers who could strike with precision, riders who moved like shadows, and fighters who stood against even the greatest heroes. The myths often tell of clashes between the Amazons and Greek heroes. Heracles fought the Amazon queen Hippolyta during his labors. Achilles faced Penthesilea, another Amazon queen, during the Trojan War. These encounters were not simple victories. They were battles that tested the strength of even the most celebrated warriors. The Amazons, daughters of Ares, carried his fury into every fight. Yet the Amazons were not only symbols of war. They represented independence, defiance, and the power of women in a world dominated by men. Their connection to Ares gave them the spirit of battle. But their stories carried deeper meaning, the reminder that strength and courage are not bound by gender, and that the god of war's legacy could be found in unexpected places. For the Greeks, the Amazons were both myth and warning. They were admired for their bravery, yet feared for their defiance of traditional roles. In them, Ares' essence lived on, not in Olympus, but in the hearts of warriors who refused to yield. Thus, the Amazons stood as living echoes of Ares, fierce, passionate, and eternal. They were his daughters, his legacy, and his reminder that war's spirit can be found wherever courage rises against fear. Even gods, mighty and immortal, are not beyond humiliation. For Ares, the god of war, one of his most embarrassing tales came at the hands of the Alaudae giants, two colossal brothers named Otus and Ephialtes. They were not ordinary foes. They were sons of Poseidon, towering figures whose ambition reached beyond mortal limits. The Alaudae were bold, reckless, and determined to challenge the Olympians themselves. They sought to overthrow the gods, stacking mountains upon mountains in their attempt to storm the heavens. Their strength was immense, and their audacity unmatched. And in their defiance, they managed to do what few mortals or immortals ever could. They captured Ares. The story tells that Ares, in his fury, charged against them, but the giants, clever and coordinated, overpowered him. They bound him in chains and locked him inside a bronze jar, a prison unworthy of a god, yet humiliatingly effective. For 13 months, Ares remained trapped, his rage echoing within the hollow metal, unheard and unanswered. Imagine the god of war, who thrived on the clash of battle, confined in silence. No spears, no shields, no cries of warriors, only the suffocating stillness of captivity. For Ares, it was not only a defeat, but a torment. His essence was chaos and fury, yet he was forced into stillness, powerless against the giants who mocked him. It was only through the intervention of Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, and Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, that Ares was freed. They tricked the giants, turning their ambition against them, and rescued the god of war from his humiliating prison. This tale revealed the vulnerability of Ares. Despite his power, his fury, and his divine strength, he could be defeated, captured, and mocked. The Elode giants showed that brute force, when combined with cunning, could overcome even the god of war. For mortals, the story was a reminder that rage alone is not enough. Even the fiercest warrior can be undone by cleverness and strength. And for Ares, it was another mark of humiliation, another tale that showed his recklessness often led to downfall. Yet, true to his nature, Ares did not learn restraint. Once freed, he returned to battle, his fury undiminished. The bronze jar became a symbol of his weakness, but also of his resilience, for even humiliation could not silence the eternal flame of war within him. The myths of Ares are filled not only with scandal and humiliation, but also with tales of dark battles and endless bloodshed. He was not a god who appeared in gentle stories or peaceful resolutions. Wherever Ares walked, war followed, and the legends surrounding him often carried a shadow of violence that unsettled mortals and gods alike. Ares was said to wander battlefields, delighting in the clash of armies. He did not care for sides or causes. He cared only for the chaos itself. To him, war was not about justice or victory, but about the raw fury of combat. His presence was the storm that turned men against one another, the madness that made warriors forget reason. One legend tells of Ares's insatiable thirst for conflict. He was described as roaming the world, seeking out quarrels, stirring disputes, and reveling in destruction. Unlike Athena, who guided war toward resolution, Ares thrived in prolonging strife. He was the god who ensured that peace was fragile, easily broken by the spark of anger. Ares was also tied to acts of cruelty. Some stories speak of him delighting in the slaughter of mortals, watching as cities burned and armies fell. His companions, Phobos, Fear, and Deimos Terror, spread panic wherever he went, ensuring that his battles were not only physical but psychological. To face Ares was to face not only spears and swords, but dread itself. Yet, his dark legends were not without irony. Despite his love of battle, Ares was often defeated, wounded, or humiliated. Mortals struck him down, gods mocked him, and even giants captured him. His fury was immense, but it was not always victorious. These defeats made his darkness more complex. He was terrifying, but also flawed, a god whose passion often led to downfall. For the Greeks, Ares's dark legends were warnings. They reminded mortals that war is not glorious, but destructive. Ares was the embodiment of the side of conflict that no one wished to celebrate: the bloodshed, the cruelty, the endless cycle of violence. He was the god who showed that war, once unleashed, could consume everything. Thus, Ares's myths carried a shadow that lingered long after the battles ended. He was the god of fury, yes, but also the god of blood, a reminder that conflict is not only about victory, but about the cost paid in suffering and loss. For a god as powerful as Ares, one might expect temples rising in every city, festivals filled with songs of battle, and sacrifices offered daily to honor him. Yet the reality was far different. Among the Olympians, Ares was one of the least celebrated. His worship was sparse, his temples few, and his name often spoken with unease rather than devotion. The Greeks admired gods who brought wisdom, prosperity, or protection. Athena, for example, was honored with the Grand Parthenon in Athens, a temple that stood as a symbol of her guidance and intelligence. Zeus had shrines across Greece, and Apollo was celebrated with music and prophecy. Ares, however, was treated with caution. He represented the chaos of war, the destruction that mortals feared. To worship him openly was to invite the very violence they wished to avoid. Still, Ares was not without followers. In Sparta, a city defined by its warrior culture, Ares was respected more than elsewhere. The Spartans valued his raw aggression, his embodiment of battle fury. They offered sacrifices to him before campaigns, seeking his strength in combat. Some accounts even describe the Spartans sacrificing puppies to Ares, a grim ritual meant to honor his ferocity. Elsewhere, Ares's worship was modest. Small shrines, altars, and offerings were made, but rarely with grandeur. He was acknowledged, but not adored. Mortals prayed to him not out of love, but out of fear, hoping to appease him, to keep his fury away from their cities. In art and literature, Ares was often depicted as a figure of chaos rather than glory. He appeared in armor, spear in hand, but his stories were filled with defeats, humiliations, and reckless rage. The Greeks saw him not as a noble protector, but as a reminder of war's destructive side. This attitude reflected the Greek view of conflict itself. They understood that war was sometimes necessary, but they did not celebrate its violence. They honored strategy, wisdom, and victory, qualities embodied by Athena, while treating Ares as the embodiment of war's darker truth. His temples were fewer because his essence was feared, not cherished. Thus, Ares's worship revealed the paradox of his role. He was a god, eternal and powerful, yet avoided and mistrusted. Mortals could not ignore him, for war was inevitable, but they did not embrace him, for war was also ruin. Ares was honored only as much as necessary, a god to be respected from a distance, never invited too close. The Greeks were never united in how they viewed Ares. His presence was felt across the land, but the way he was honored or avoided depended greatly on the city. Two of the most famous city-states, Sparta and Athens, held opinions of Ares that could not have been more different. The Spartans built their society around war, discipline, and strength. For them, Ares was not a reckless god to be feared, but a divine ally. Sacrifices were made to him before campaigns, and his spirit was invoked to fuel their courage. In Athens, however, the story was different. The Athenians valued wisdom, philosophy, and strategy. They admired Athena, their patron goddess, who represented intelligence, planning, and balance. His reckless fury was seen as dangerous, his chaos as destructive. Ares was the same god, yet his meaning shifted depending on the values of the people. In one city, he was honored. In another, he was mistrusted. He was both patron and warning, both ally and threat. Thus, Ares's role in Greece was not uniform. He was a god of war, yes, but also a mirror of human society. In Sparta, he reflected the glory of battle. In Athens, he reflected the fear of chaos. Together, these two views remind us that war is never seen the same way by all. It is both strength and danger, both pride and ruin. Though Ares was not the most beloved of the Olympians, he was far too important to be ignored. His image and stories found their way into art, poetry, and literature, leaving behind a trail of depictions that revealed how the Greeks truly felt about him. In ancient art, Ares was often shown as a powerful warrior, clad in bronze armor, spear and shield in hand, and a helmet with a tall crest. His figure was strong, imposing, and unmistakably martial. Yet, unlike Athena, whose depictions carried dignity and wisdom, Ares's images often emphasized raw aggression. He was the god of war, yes, but not the god of noble victory. His stance was fierce, his eyes restless, his presence unsettling. On pottery and vases, Ares appeared in scenes of battle, sometimes accompanied by his sons Phobos and Deimos, spreading fear and terror. In other depictions, he was shown beside Aphrodite, a reminder of his scandalous love affair. These images captured both sides of his nature, the fury of war and the passion of desire. In literature, Ares's character was equally complex. Homer's Iliad paints him as reckless, In Roman art and literature, Mars was celebrated, honored, and revered. The contrast between Greek Ares and Roman Mars revealed how differently cultures viewed war. For the Greeks, it was chaos. For the Romans, it was glory. Among all the Olympian gods, Ares was perhaps the most feared and the least loved. While Zeus commanded respect, Athena inspired admiration, and Apollo drew devotion, Ares was treated with caution. The Greeks did not embrace him warmly, for he embodied the side of war that mortals dreaded most. The Greeks understood that war was sometimes necessary. It could defend cities, secure freedom, or bring glory. But they also knew that war was destructive, cruel, and unpredictable. Ares represented this darker truth. He was not the god of noble victories or clever strategies. He was the god of chaos, bloodshed, and fury. To worship him openly was to invite the very violence they wished to avoid. His personality made him difficult to admire. Ares was impulsive, reckless, and often humiliated in myths. He charged into battles without thought, only to be wounded by mortals or mocked by gods. Even Zeus, his own father, called him hateful. Unlike Athena, who guided war with wisdom, Ares seemed to revel in destruction for its own sake. The Greeks feared not only his fury, but also his companions. Phobos' fear and Deimos' terror followed him into battle, spreading panic among soldiers. To pray to Ares was to acknowledge these forces, to invite dread and chaos into one's life. Most mortals preferred to honor gods who brought peace, prosperity, or protection, rather than one who thrived on suffering. This is why Ares had few temples and modest worship compared to other Olympians. He was respected, but from a distance. Sacrifices were made to appease him, not to celebrate him. In places like Sparta, where war was central to life, Ares was honored more openly, but in most of Greece, he was avoided, his name spoken with unease. Ultimately, the Greeks feared Ares because he reminded them of war's true nature. War was not glorious. It was bloody, chaotic, and terrifying. Ares embodied all of this. He was necessary, but not beloved. He was eternal, but not cherished. He was the god of war's shadow, the side mortals hoped never to face. Though the Greeks often feared and avoided Ares, his story did not end with them. When the Romans inherited much of Greek mythology, they transformed Ares into Mars, and in doing so, they reshaped his image entirely. In Greek tales, Ares was reckless, destructive, and often humiliated. He embodied the chaos of war, the bloodshed that mortals dreaded. But the Romans saw war differently. For them, war was not only violence, it was discipline, conquest, and the foundation of empire. And so Mars became not a hated god, but a revered one. Mars was celebrated as a father of the Roman people. According to legend, he was the father of Romulus and Remus, the twin brothers who founded Rome. This connection gave Mars a role not only as a god of war, but as a god of origins, protector of the Roman state, and symbol of its destiny. Unlike Ares, Mars was tied to glory, honor, and civic pride. Temples to Mars were grand and numerous. The Campus Martis in Rome, the Field of Mars, was dedicated to him, a place where soldiers trained and citizens gathered. Festivals honored him, sacrifices were made to him, and his name was spoken with reverence. Mars was not avoided. He was embraced as a guardian of Rome's strength. In art and literature, Mars was depicted with dignity. He wore armor, carried weapons, and stood as a noble figure. His image was not of reckless fury, but of disciplined power. Roman poets praised him, Roman generals invoked him, and Roman citizens saw him as a symbol of their empire's greatness. This transformation revealed the difference between Greek and Roman culture. The Greeks, wary of wars, chaos, mistrusted Ares. The Romans, built upon conquest, celebrated Mars. Where Ares was feared, Mars was honored. Where Ares was mocked, Mars was revered. Yet, beneath the Roman polish, the essence of Ares remained. Mars was still the god of battle, still tied to blood and conflict. The Romans had reshaped his image, but the storm of war was never far from his name. He was both protector and destroyer, both father and warrior, both legacy and danger. Thus, in later myths and Roman culture, Ares found new life as Mars. He was no longer the despised god of chaos, but the proud god of empire. His transformation showed how the meaning of war could change across cultures, from fear to glory, from destruction to destiny. Though centuries have passed since the Greeks first told his stories, the legacy of Ares has never faded. He was not the most beloved of the Olympians, nor the most admired, but he was unforgettable. His essence, the fury, the fear, the passion, became a symbol of war itself, an eternal flame that continues to burn in human history. Ares was more than a god of battle. He was the embodiment of the emotions that drive conflict, the sudden rush of courage, the trembling of fear, the consuming fire of passion. Mortals saw him not only in the clash of swords, but in the restless spirit that makes war inevitable. His presence was a reminder that conflict is not only about weapons, but about the human heart. Even in his defeats, Ares endured. He was mocked, wounded, and humiliated, yet he returned to battle again and again. His resilience reflected the truth of war. It never truly disappears. Peace may come, but the flame of conflict lingers, waiting to rise again. In this way, Ares was eternal, not because mortals adored him, but because they could never escape the shadow he cast. The Romans reshaped him into Mars, a god of glory and empire, but the essence remained. Whether feared or honored, Ares's spirit lived on in every culture that faced the reality of war. His legacy was not temples or festivals, but the recognition that war is a part of human existence, destructive, terrifying, yet enduring. Thus, the legacy of Ares is the eternal flame of war. It flickers in every battlefield, every clash of nations, every moment when passion overwhelms reason. He is not remembered for wisdom or kindness, but for the storm he represents. And though mortals may seek peace, the flame of Ares reminds them that conflict is never far away. May the storm of his tales fade into quiet dreams, and may your night be free of battles. Good night.